My name is Mateo Vargas, and for a long time I lived without knowing what my true purpose was. I grew up in Managua, Nicaragua, a country full of religious traditions, but also marked by spiritual rituals and indigenous witchcraft. Since I was little, I heard stories about sorcerers, enchantments, and entities that could bring power and wealth. Some people feared these forces, others sought them out. I simply ignored them. For me, God was just a distant belief. If he existed, he didn't seem to care too much about the world. I didn't see miracles. I didn't feel his presence. I believed that everyone should take care of their own life without expecting anything from above, until a man crossed my path, and everything changed. That man was called Ethan Wallace, a missionary who had come from New Zealand to preach the gospel in Nicaragua. He spoke with a passion that I had never seen before. His message was not just loose words, it was not just any sermon, it was like a fire, burning inside. His words seemed to have life. And as he spoke about Jesus Christ, I felt something I had never felt before. My wife Kamala was at my side. I saw that her eyes were full of tears. She also felt something strong inside her. At that moment we had no doubts when the missionary made the invitation to give our lives to God. Our hearts burned and our knees touched the ground. It was not just an emotional moment, something really happened inside us. It was as if a veil had been torn before our eyes, allowing us to see something that was always there but that we had never perceived. The emptiness that we carried disappeared and in its place was born an uncontrollable desire to seek the presence of God. What we did not know was that this journey would take us to a supernatural experience that would change not only our lives but also our vision of eternity. From the moment we gave our lives to God, nothing went back to how it was before. The desire to seek his presence grew inside us like a fire that could not be extinguished. Kamala and I began to pray 3 times a day. We prayed every day, in the morning, in the afternoon and at night. Before, prayer was something that we did occasionally, but now it had become like breathing. We spent hours on our knees crying out to God, thanking him for salvation and asking for direction for our new path. Every day our faith grew stronger and the Bible became our daily food. When we read the verses we felt that each word had life, teaching us things we had never understood before. The presence of God became real in our home, but then something began to happen. Small signs began to appear. At first they seemed like coincidences, but soon we realized that something spiritual was moving around us. One night while praying, there was no draft, it was something different, a presence. We looked at each other without saying anything, but deep down we knew that this was not natural. The days passed and the signs began to intensify, lights that flickered for no reason, objects that fell alone, a weight in the air that sometimes made us feel watched. But the worst happened when Kamala began to have terrifying nightmares. She would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, saying that she saw shadows around the bed looking at her. Some nights she described seeing red eyes shining in the darkness, that they were just bad dreams. But something inside me knew it wasn't just that something was happening, but something that went beyond the physical world. That night something even stranger happened. While we were sleeping we heard a loud noise in the living room. It seemed as if something had fallen to the floor. I got up quickly and went to see. The air was freezing around, hoping to find some broken object, but everything was in its place. It was then when I saw in the middle of the living room on the table the Bible that was open, and the wind that seemed to come from nowhere turned its pages. I approached slowly, feeling my heart beating strongly. Kamala came behind me holding my arm as we looked at the page where the Bible had stopped. A single verse seemed to scream before us, "Our fight is not against blood and flesh but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly realms." Ephesians 6 verse 12. At that moment we understood it was not just a bad dream, it was not just a feeling. We were in a war, and this war had just begun. During prayer the dark tunnel seemed to have no end. I felt like I was being dragged with a speed impossible to describe. The air became increasingly heavier and suffocating, and in the distance I began to hear disturbing sounds, cries of despair, deep laments that came from everywhere. I tried to scream but my voice did not come out. I was completely out of my body, being taken to a place that I still did not understand. The angel was at my side, but his face remained unchanged. without a trace of fear or doubt. Suddenly the tunnel opened and I saw what appeared before my eyes that left me breathless. I had heard about that place all my life. People talked about it in churches, in sermons, in warnings from the Bible, but nothing had prepared me for what I saw with my own eyes. Hell. My soul shuddered. Before me was a territory of pure horror, that stretched out. The ground was barren, with cracks from which endless flames came out. The air was heavy with an unbearable stench like sulfur and burning flesh. The heat was so suffocating that it seemed to penetrate the depths of my being, but the worst were the screams, thousands, maybe millions of voices crying out at the same time. They were laments of a suffering that never ended, voices that screamed for help, asking for mercy, asking for a second chance. I tried to move, but my spiritual body seemed to be paralyzed. My eyes were forced to look what I did not want to see. The angel spoke with a firm voice, "Matthew, this is what awaits those who reject God." I could not believe what I saw. There were people trapped in pits of fire where the flames rose and devoured their bodies, but they were not consumed. I saw men and women with expressions of pure terror, their faces deformed by pain and eternal suffering. Some tried to escape, but invisible forces kept them trapped. Here are those who ignored God's call, those who believed they would always have more time. My heart shuddered. These people were not demons, they were not monsters, they were human beings, people like me, people who had once had family, friends, dreams, but who were now condemned forever. The dark tunnel opened and suddenly I found myself on the edge of a terrifying abyss. What I saw paralyzed me with terror. Hell stretched before my eyes like a vast landscape of horror and despair, a place where time seemed not to exist, where everything was suffering and eternal damnation. The ground was covered with cracks from which endless flames sprang. The heat was unbearable, but not a common heat, but one that burned the very essence of the soul. A nauseating stench of sulfur and rotting flesh permeated the air to breathe. There was an agony, but the worst thing was not the fire nor the heat nor the stench. The worst thing was the screams of thousands of voices, maybe millions, crying at the same time. They were screams of pain, of anguish, of suffering without end, a desperate clamor that pierced the soul. People asking for help, begging for mercy, imploring a second chance, but I knew that there would not be any. There was no hope. In that place the souls were being tormented in different ways. Some were trapped in pits of fire where the flames rose and devoured their bodies without ever destroying them. Others were chained in cells of incandescent iron hitting the bars. I saw a man being attacked by horrible demons, creatures with claws and sharp teeth that tore him apart incessantly. His flesh regenerated itself to be torn apart again. I saw a woman trapped in a black mirror where all the opportunities she had in life to accept God were reflected, but that she rejected one by one. Her own thoughts tormented her and her cry of repentance was unbearable. The suffering was not only physical, it was emotional, it was mental, it was spiritual. Each soul relived its worst guilt, its worst decision and its worst sin, over and over again without being able to escape. The angel spoke again with a firm voice, "Matthew, look carefully, this is what awaits those who reject salvation." "No, it can't be," I whispered with tears in my eyes, but the worst was yet to come. Suddenly a dark shadow rose in the distance. There on a mountain of fire and darkness, there was an imposing throne made of chains and skulls, and sitting on was Satan. My soul trembled. It was not like the children's drawings describe him. It wasn't a red demon with horns, it was something much worse. His skin was black like burnt ash, his face deformed by a cruel smile, his eyes were living flames. His presence was so overwhelming that hell itself seemed to tremble before him. All around him legions of demons prostrated themselves waiting for his orders. One of them crawled to his feet and spoke with a trembling voice, "Master, more souls are falling in hell. Humans continue to reject God. Our work is working." That was when Satan laughed with a terrifying sound that shook everything. As a result the flames grew, the ground shuddered, and then he looked directly at me. Silence fell over hell. The whole place seemed to shake when Satan stood up from his throne of darkness. His gaze burned like living fire. His smile was cruel, full of mockery. He knew that I was there. He whispered with a deep and cutting voice that seemed to pierce my soul, "You shouldn't be here yet, Matteo." My body trembled. I tried to look away, but it was impossible. The angel who accompanied me did not move. Satan slowly descended from his throne, and with each step he took the whole hell trembled. The flames grew around him and the tormented soul's screams with more desperation. He stopped in front of me. I could feel the suffocating heat of his presence. His smile widened. "Since you are here, let me show you what we are doing." Suddenly hell opened before my eyes. I saw thousands of souls falling like a dark rain. People who until a few seconds ago were alive on earth were now dragged by invisible forces towards their damnation. I saw men and women screaming in terror. Some begged for mercy, others cursed, some still did not understand that they were dead. Satan reached out his hand, and in the air a dark window appeared. As I looked inside, I saw the earth. It was as if I were seeing humanity from above. The cities, the people, the churches, and what I saw left me speechless. I saw empty temples. I saw cold, indifferent Christians trapped in their routines. I saw people living as if God did not exist. Then Satan whispered, "The greatest deception I have done is to convince the world that I do not exist." His eyes shone with malice. "They do not believe in me, they do not believe in hell, they do not believe in God. They think they are free, that they can do what they want, but when they die they are mine." The scene changed. Satan pointed to a group of people who at that time were alive on earth. "Observe." I saw men and women laughing, enjoying life, completely oblivious to spiritual reality. And then I saw their death, accidents, sudden illnesses, unexpected tragedies. I saw their souls separate from their bodies and fall. They fell straight to hell. They screamed, they begged, but it was too late. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. "This cannot be the end," I screamed with tears in my eyes. "There has to be another chance for them." The angel looked at me seriously. "That's why you must return, Matteo," and pointed to the souls that had just fallen. The angel lowered his gaze. His voice sounded full of sadness. They had their chance. Suddenly Satan came closer to me. His face was just centimeters from mine. His presence was suffocating. He whispered, "If you come back, Matteo, I will go after you. I will not rest until I destroy you." He smiled, and then all hell began to tremble violently. An invisible force dragged me back. The scene of fire and torment dissolved before my eyes. The screams of the souls began to fade in the distance, and suddenly everything flew. Darkness. Suddenly hell disappeared. I felt that I was dragged backwards with an indescribable speed. Everything around me was darkness and chaos. The screams of the souls slowly faded, and the suffocating heat of hell was replaced by a shuddering cold. Then a clearing appeared before me. A second later I felt my body again. I opened my eyes slowly. My breathing was heavy, my chest was burning. I felt a crushing weight fall on my shoulders. It was as if my entire being had been consumed by exhaustion. Then I heard a familiar voice, "Matthew, Matthew, please wake up." It was Kamala, my wife. She was kneeling beside me with her face covered in tears. Her hands were shaking as she held my face. She looked at me terrified. "You came back. God brought you back." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I tried to move, but my body was weak. I was alive, but I knew nothing would ever be the same. I tried to sit up, still in a state of shock. My mind was in hell. The screams of souls still echoed in my head. The face of Satan still burned in my thoughts. The desperation of those who fell. My breathing quickened. I felt like I couldn't bear the weight of what I had seen. Camilla hugged me tightly, but my eyes were still fixed on the void. She noticed my state and whispered, "Matteo, what did you see?" I opened my mouth to answer, but I couldn't explain the horror I witnessed. How to put into words the eternal suffering. A deep pain settled in my chest. I felt my soul burning with sadness and urgency. I had to tell the world what I saw.